Okay, Jim, turn your everybody else. Oh, I've got my videos off. I'm gonna mute my.
About to count down.
I think there's over nearly 300 people watching already.
Okay, live, 10.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this live session this evening. My name is Liam, and I'm delighted to be hosting tonight for this special session, actually, discussing and highlighting the impact of COVID-19 on students across the country. We're joined by a fantastic range of speakers who are students and activists with a lot to say about the current situation. What we've seen over the last few months is the way that capitalists have exploited the coronavirus pandemic. We entered the crisis with dread, but there was also a sense that the psychology of the nation might change. It remains true that the health of the richest person in our society depends on the health of the poorest. It's a collective crisis that cannot be solved by isolated individual actions. But it is my belief that some of this optimism was short-lived. Nowhere has the exploitation of the crisis been as clear as with students across the country who were forced into unsafe conditions to prop up landlords' payments and earnings and the current neoliberal conception of the university. It's had a major impact on students' finances, their mental health, physical health, and their learning outcomes. Staff have been massively impacted, and I share my solidarity with the UCU and the brilliant work that the union is doing. But we clearly need to go further, particularly reading the news today about some of the potentially disastrous plans for the Christmas break. We need to make sure that staff and students are united. I'm going to ask each of our speakers to make their contribution tonight before going to some questions, some that I might pose, but also some from the floor, if you like, if we were having a normal physical meeting. So please do post your questions in the chat or in the comments section, wherever you're watching, so that I can put them to our panelists. So I'm delighted that we're joined by Sophie Johnson, who is at Glasgow, Solomon Cuthbertson, who is at Edinburgh, and Tara Chowdhury at Cambridge. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hand over to Sophie to start us off. Over to you, Sophie.
Hi there, thank you very much. So I'll first kind of update you on the kind of current situation at Glasgow. And because it hit us quite early on, we're about 3 weeks ahead in terms of mass student outbreaks in university halls and south of the border. So most students have actually come out of the isolation period. Nevertheless, the treatment of students during the period was nothing short of absolutely horrendous. The first thing I'd like to bring up is the huge amount of blame Glasgow students were subjected to, particularly in the early days, as soon as the completely predictable outbreaks happened in uni
I've just turned it up in OBS, maybe that's why.
Despite Sturgeon's declaration that students weren't to blame, the Scottish Government actually made a joint statement on the 24th of last month with the University of Scotland, so university management, that we will intensify our institutional
No, the feedback's like an echo.
liaison with Police Scotland to ensure vigilance about students' behaviour off campus and in private accommodation, which put a clear and completely unjustified onus on students. At Glasgow University, we're all actually issued with a really strict mail and kind of warning that if any rules were broken, which came to include leaving your student halls or your private accommodation to go back home, we could be subject to expulsion. Bearing in mind this was only weeks after many students had arrived at a completely new environment, that there was absolutely no need to be there, let alone signing to expensive rent contracts. Even in some of the cheaper university accommodations, such as the heavily hit Marano halls, rent has almost doubled in less than a decade. Mental health provisions have also been a huge mess during this crisis, which has, of course, tragically highlighted by the death of a student in Manchester a few weeks ago. But in Scotland, due to the nature of our education system, many students are beginning university are actually under 18, so minors, and therefore actually owed an extra degree of care in their new university homes, yet some were neglected any support or real instructions except to stay inside or face the repercussions after once they just started. This could quite clearly have been prevented, as at the end of last month, the Minister for Further Education even said that there was a route map issued to operate student residence, as they knew that there was a huge risk. So this clearly shows that this is a market-driven decision that completely undermines education and student welfare. It's quite frankly pretty sad. However, on a more positive note, something good at least has come from this mess, and that awareness in the new student hubs. As tenants, because new tenants unions have started to spring up all across the UK. In Glasgow, which reversed some of the financial damage that students were subject to in the first month of rent. If you look at Manchester and at Bristol, new student unions are rising from there too. So that, on a positive note, that would be the best thing to take out of a really, really bad situation.
Thank you, Sophie, for your contribution there. I'm going to go next to Solomon, if I can, and allow you to make your contribution.
Absolutely, thank you. So my name's Solomon, I'm a first year student here at Edinburgh. My story really starts back at the A-level results day. So I was caught up in that fiasco. Didn't meet the grades I needed to come into Edinburgh. I needed ABB, and the algorithm gave me 3 Bs. So that meant the university gave my place away to someone else. And then when UTA came from Cameron Williamson, I then had the grades needed to come to Edinburgh. Now, that was a bit of an issue because they'd now given away my place and they didn't know where they were going to fit it. So about a week later, they were able to find me a place and I got an accommodation offer. But at that point, I had 2 weeks to decide whether I was going to defer for a year and come up next year, whether I was going to stay in Manchester and do the course online, or whether I was going to move up to Edinburgh, pay the accommodation fee, and do the degree up here. Ultimately, with the university marketed it to us that it was going to be a hybrid learning system, which meant we would have in-person tutorials and pre-recorded online lectures. And I was like, you know what, that'd be fine. Being able to speak to people on my course and my tutors in live time, that makes up for not going to lectures. So I decided to come up to Edinburgh. I booked my accommodation and moved up. When we got here, we found that the course was actually entirely asynchronous. So we didn't, of course, we had our pre-recorded lectures, but tutorials went from in-person, what was advertised to be an in-person tutorial, to not even a Zoom call tutorial, but what they called discussion boards, which are effectively like Facebook posts, which you would be asked to put a contribution into at the start of the week, and then your tutor would give back to you feedback. So we had no live interaction with anyone on our courses. Now, the Wi-Fi wasn't strong enough. So for any online calls that we had with personal tutors and, for instance, a fully online Freshers Week, we didn't have the free Wi-Fi at the accommodation wasn't strong enough for us to be able to actually coherently do that. And unless you wanted to pay 200, the free Wi-Fi at the accommodation wasn't strong enough for us to be able to actually coherently do that. And unless you wanted to pay £200 for a higher bandwidth for Wi-Fi, you wouldn't be able to get access to it. So from there, the university, where they had very little break these rules, you'll either get kicked out of your accommodation, you might get kicked out of your course, or both. And we didn't really have anywhere to report issues in accommodation or with our courses. So, I mean, of course, the students were very unhappy with that, and I was part of a group of students. We got together and we wrote an open letter. We wrote a complaint to university management, and we said, look, we're not happy with paying £9,250 a year minimum, because some of us were postgraduates, for a course that was advertised to be hybrid, so in person or live and pre-recorded, not entirely online and asynchronous. So we said, issues with that, we've issues with the way you've handled accommodation and how the communication has been so poor from the university to the students. So we sent off that letter to the university, and they got back to us and had a really quite rude letter back to us. And they dismissed lots of our complaints, threw lots of facts and figures and numbers at us. So we tested them a little more, and we they offered us a meeting to discuss our gripes and to work constructively with them to improve the situation for students. So last week we had that meeting. About 6 of us spoke with the vice principal and a few heads of schools and some of the management that have responsibilities for certain areas of the university. And we were actually really quite pleased. They were really quite receptive of our issues and our complaints, and they promised us that they would improve accommodation, improve communication with us and have more dialogue style communication, and that many of the issues with the discussion boards would be solved for semester 2. So that was about a week ago now, and we're yet to see any improvements. But they offered us at the time another meeting in 2 weeks, so we can actually keep them accountable to their promises. So they can actually make the promises and not deliver on them, and we can actually say to them, you made these promises, you've not done that in 2 weeks' time, if that's the case. So we are actually quite optimistic that we will see some positive change, and it goes to show, if you group together as quite a large group of students, you can actually make quite a positive change. Well, we certainly hope we can make quite a positive change for the university. So yeah, that's my story.
Thank you, Solomon. Really appreciate that. I just want to say, before I go to Tara, we can see that some people are saying that they're having a few difficulties on the stream, and the team in the background are trying to sort that out. I believe the event is being recorded as well, and hopefully the tech issues for anybody will be over by the time we get to the questions, so that we can develop what's been said by Sophie and Solomon so far. But I'm going to pass over to Tara now, who I believe is isolated in her room owing to a lockdown at Cambridge. So I'll pass over to you, Tara.
Hiya. I hope you can hear me, because I know there's been quite a few tech issues. Yeah, so as Liam said, I'm currently at Cambridge doing my 2nd year, and I'm in lockdown at the moment. My staircase is on lockdown, and to be honest, it's kind of really made me realize how much of an outrage it is that we've been brought back to uni at this current stage. I don't feel safe, and I don't think provisions have gone far enough to safeguard our mental health and our safety in general in relation to COVID. Um, we were told that we would be we'd have some kind of access to hybrid learning, like Solomon said. So we didn't get a choice in coming back, though. It was, you know, we had to come back unless there were really, really exceptional circumstances. We would all have to return to Cambridge. And yeah, that was on the promise that in-person teaching would remain. Lectures would be moved online, but individual supervisions and stuff would all be done in person. That turned out to be a total lie. I do history and politics, so my subject doesn't require any kind of practical labs like some of the more sciencey subjects do. I know they're still continuing to have limited in-person teaching, but my subject is now entirely through a computer screen. So I'm currently sat in my room, unable to leave, um, paying rent when I could be doing this from home, um, which is obviously cause for concern. And like, I'm just pretty disappointed, to be honest, with how this has been handled by the government and the university. It's had quite a bad effect on my mental health and quite a few other people's mental health that I'm living with. I don't think this is something that was considered by the government when they decided to send everyone back. I can't even imagine how freshers are feeling right now. You don't come to uni without knowing that many people just to be told you have to stay in your room or your corridor or your accommodation block. Um, it's a crisis, to be honest, and I don't think it's very dramatic to call it that. Um, and another point I'd like to make is that I think for disabled students as well,